The eviction notice was a death sentence. Matthew's art shop, the gilded brush, his father's legacy, was about to become another forgotten relic. He was ready to bury the artist within, convinced his own soul was as broken as the objects he painted. But despair, like paint, can be remixed. The gilded brush was a lie. The name, painted in elegant, flaking gold leaf script on the glass of the front door, promised a world of artistic splendor. But inside, the promise had long since curdled. Dust motes danced in the weak afternoon light, settling on stacks of unsold canvases that leaned like tired soldiers against the walls. The air, thick and still, was a cocktail of turpentine, linseed oil, and something less tangible but far more potent: the slow, quiet scent of failure. Matthew, at 42, felt like he had been breathing it in for years. He stood behind the scarred wooden counter, the shop's keeper and its primary ghost. The business, inherited from a father who had known a different, kinder Boston, was now an anachronism. Outside, the old North End Street was succumbing to a relentless tide of gentrification. Sleek cafes with minimalist logos and hot yoga studios with gleaming windows had replaced the familiar bakeries and cobblers. His shop, with its cluttered window display of hardened paint tubes and yellowing sketch pads, was an island of decay in a sea of aggressive renewal. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, the gesture weary and automatic. It had been 7 months since he'd last picked up a brush for himself. 7 months since he'd felt the specific, soul-deep satisfaction of mixing the perfect shade of gray for a rain-slicked pavement, or the ochre of a forgotten, rusting bolt. His own art, the thing that had once set his soul alight, was the glorification of the discarded. He painted the small, overlooked tragedies of the city: a single child's mitten, its wool frayed with loss; the ghost of a smile on a water-stained photograph found in a gutter; a lone, rusted key, its purpose forever a mystery. But you couldn't pay rent with meticulously rendered sorrow. The stack of unpaid invoices hidden beneath the cash register was a testament to that. He was a curator of relics in a world that only valued the new. The gilded brush wasn't just the store's name. It was what he had once believed himself to be. Now, the gilding had flaked away, revealing the cheap, splintered wood beneath. He felt as obsolete as a dried-up pot of ink. The bell above the door chimed, a sound so infrequent it made Matthew jump. It wasn't a customer. It was Mr. Henderson, his landlord, a man who moved with the brisk, unapologetic purpose of a shark. He wasn't carrying a briefcase. He was carrying a single, crisp envelope. "Matthew," he began, his tone devoid of pleasantries, "we need to talk." He slid the envelope across the counter. It wasn't a conversation, it was a verdict. "This is a 30-day notice to vacate." Matthew stared at the envelope, his throat suddenly tight. 30 days. "Mr. Henderson, I just need a little more time." "Time is up," Henderson said, his gaze sweeping over the cluttered shop with undisguised disdain. "A new coffee franchise has made an offer, double the rent. It's just business, you understand." He didn't wait for an answer, turning and leaving as abruptly as he had arrived. The chiming of the bell felt like a funeral toll. That night, long after the last of the city's commuters had hurried home, Matthew sat alone in the echoing silence of his shop. The envelope lay open on the counter, its formal, legalistic words a death sentence for the gilded brush. He felt a profound, hollowing emptiness. All the fight had gone out of him. His eyes, gritty with exhaustion, drifted to the back of the shop, landing on a canvas shrouded in a dusty cloth. He walked over and pulled the cover away. It was his last painting, the one he'd finished just before the creative well had run dry. "Sparrow After the Rain." It was a small, hyper-realistic masterpiece of despair. A common house sparrow lay on its side on the wet, black asphalt of an alley. Each feather was rendered with excruciating detail, some matted with rainwater, others ruffled by a final, unseen shudder. The genius of the piece was in the reflection captured on the bird's unseeing eye and in the puddles around it. The lurid, indifferent glow of a distant neon sign, its vibrant pinks and blues a stark, cruel contrast to the tiny, still life form. It was a painting of profound beauty and absolute heartbreak. Staring at it, Matthew saw his own reflection. He was that sparrow, and for the first time he accepted it. He would clear out the shop, sell what he could for pennies, and look for a job stocking shelves in a warehouse. He would finally bury the artist named Matthew. It happened on a Thursday, 2 weeks before his eviction date. The sky didn't just darken, it bruised, a deep, angry purple that burst open without warning. The rain came not in drops but in sheets, a vertical river flooding the Boston streets. The old windowpanes of the gilded brush rattled in their frames, and the world outside became a gray, wavering curtain. Matthew was half-heartedly sorting through a box of old framing hardware. The metallic clinks a pathetic protest against the roar of the downpour. The bell chimed again, this time frantic and sharp, followed by a gust of wind that sent a spray of cold rain across the floorboards. A woman stumbled in, shaking a drenched umbrella that refused to cooperate. "Sorry," she gasped, wrestling it closed and leaning it against the doorframe. "It's a monsoon out there. My meeting was just canceled. I just needed to escape." This was Amy. She was in her early 30s, dressed in a stylish but now sodden trench coat, her dark hair plastered to her temples. As the curator for the Sterling Gallery, one of the city's most forward-thinking art spaces, her eye was trained to assess and categorize in an instant. Her quick, professional sweep of the shop took in the sad, amateurish landscapes, the gaudy, pre-made frames, and the general air of neglect. The place smelled of dust and resignation, a world away from the sterile white walls and calculated lighting she inhabited daily. It was a graveyard of forgotten hobbies. "Take your time," Matthew said, his voice flat, not even looking up from his box of metal corners. He was an object in the room, as much a fixture as the dusty counter. She gave him a small, absent smile, her mind already elsewhere. She moved further from the door, her phone in her hand, her thumb hovering over a rideshare app. This place was a tomb, and she just needed a moment's shelter before plunging back into the storm. Then it came, a violent, blue-white flash of lightning that bleached the world outside. For a split second, the raw, powerful light flooded the shop's dimmest corners, and her eye caught it. It wasn't the painting itself, not at first. It was a specific, impossible gleam from a canvas tucked away in the back. Amidst the dull, matte surfaces of everything else in the room, she saw a patch of darkness that looked genuinely, startlingly wet. It had a slick, oily sheen that seemed to capture and hold the lightning's momentary glare. It was a technical paradox that snagged on her professional mind. How could something look so convincingly liquid on a dry, dusty canvas in a forgotten corner of a failing shop? It was a whisper of genius in a room full of noise, and it was a whisper she couldn't ignore. Her phone forgotten, she took a tentative step deeper into the cavern of forgotten things. Amy navigated the narrow aisle, her heels clicking softly on the worn floorboards. The object of her curiosity was propped against a shelf of dried-out oil paints, half hidden behind a stack of empty frames. As she drew closer, the image resolved itself, and the breath caught in her throat. It was the sparrow. It wasn't just a painting, it was a eulogy on canvas. The sheer technical skill was staggering. She could almost feel the cold dampness of the asphalt, the heartbreaking fragility of the tiny, broken body. But it was the emotion that hit her like a physical blow. The artist hadn't just observed a dead bird, they had mourned it. They had seen the universe in its stillness, the cosmic indifference reflected in the neon glow on its feathers. It was a painting about loss, about beauty in the most desolate of places, about the quiet dignity of a life that simply ends. The image resonated with a deeply personal, fiercely guarded memory. Her father, a brilliant sculptor who worked with reclaimed metal, had died 10 years prior. He had spent his life creating magnificent, intricate figures from rust and ruin, pieces filled with a raw, aching beauty that the world had never been ready for. He died in debt, his studio filled with masterpieces no gallery would show, his spirit eroded by a lifetime of being told his vision was too dark, too niche. Amy saw her father's soul in this painting. She saw his unrewarded talent, his stubborn integrity, and the profound loneliness of an artist who sees the world with different eyes. She turned, her gaze falling on the weary, disheveled man behind the counter. "This painting," she said, her voice softer now, stripped of its earlier haste. "Who is the artist?" Matthew looked up, startled by her tone. He'd expected her to leave. "It's just an old piece," he mumbled, a reflexive defense mechanism kicking in. "Not really for sale." "I'm not asking to buy it," Amy pressed, her eyes fixed on him. "I'm asking who painted it. The detail on the wing, the way the light from the puddle reflects, it's extraordinary." Her words were specific, knowledgeable. She wasn't just a casual observer making polite conversation. She was speaking the language of art, a language Matthew hadn't heard directed at his own work in years. He looked from her intense, intelligent face to the painting of the sparrow, the most personal thing he had ever created. "I did," he said, the admission feeling like a confession. For the first time that day, he felt a flicker of something other than despair. It was the terrifying, unfamiliar sensation of being seen. A silence settled between them, thick with the drumming of the rain outside. Amy's expression shifted from professional curiosity to a focused, almost reverent intensity. She looked from the painting back to Matthew, truly seeing him for the first time, not as a shopkeeper, but as the creator of the small masterpiece before her. "My name is Amy Calloway," she said, her voice clear and direct. "I'm the curatorial manager for the Sterling Gallery downtown." Matthew's eyes widened slightly. The Sterling was a name he knew well. It was a place of consequence, a launchpad for serious artists. It was a universe away from the dusty confines of the gilded brush. The mention of it made his own situation feel even more pathetic. "We're putting together a new exhibition for the fall," Amy continued, her mind clearly working fast. "It's called Urban Echoes. We're featuring artists who explore the hidden narratives of the city, the beauty and the overlooked. This," she gestured to the sparrow, "is the very soul of that theme. Do you have other pieces like this, a series?" Matthew could only nod, his mind reeling. He thought of his small collection of lost things paintings, gathering dust in his cramped apartment, each one a private act of artistic devotion. "I want to include your work in the show," Amy stated. It wasn't a question, it was a declaration. "Not just this one, I want to see the others. I want to give them the platform they deserve." The offer was so sudden, so outrageously out of place in the context of his life, that Matthew's first instinct was to reject it. A bitter, protective cynicism rose in him. "Look, I appreciate the sentiment," he said, his tone harsher than he intended, "but my work doesn't belong in a place like the Sterling. And frankly, I'm in the middle of a closing down sale." He gestured vaguely at the chaos around them. It was a test, a way to push her away before the hope could take root and inevitably be crushed. But Amy didn't flinch. Her gaze was unwavering. "I'm not offering you charity, Matthew. I'm offering you a professional exhibition. Your work is powerful. It deserves to be seen by people who will understand it, and by people who will pay for it. The only thing it's been missing is a spotlight." She reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek, minimalist business card. She laid it on the counter, a stark white rectangle on the scarred, dark wood. "Think about it," she said softly. "The show opens in 2 months. I can reserve a wall for you. But you have to be the one to decide if you're ready to step into that light." The sincerity in her eyes was undeniable. It wasn't pity, it was belief. And for Matthew, that was a far more terrifying and powerful thing. The opening night at the Sterling Gallery was a world of sharp angles, white wine, and quiet, confident murmurs. 2 months had passed in a dizzying blur of emails, studio visits, and the careful, nerve-wracking process of framing and transporting his work. Now, standing in a corner of the cavernous, brightly lit space, Matthew felt like an imposter in a poorly fitting suit, his best one, which hadn't seen the light of day in a decade. His 5 paintings, his Lost Things series, hung on a pristine white wall under a series of perfectly calibrated spotlights. They looked important. The forgotten mitten, the rusted key, the faded photograph, the single, discarded high heel, and at the center, the sparrow. Under the gallery's lighting, their quiet sorrow seemed amplified, their intricate details glowing with a life he'd never seen in them before. He watched as elegant, black-clad patrons drifted from piece to piece, their conversations a low hum. They flowed past his wall, some offering a polite, cursory glance before moving on to the larger, more abstract pieces by more established names. With each passing group, Matthew's fragile confidence withered. Amy had been wrong. He didn't belong here. He was just about to retreat to a darker corner when he saw a man stop in front of his paintings. He was older, with a shock of silver hair and a deeply intelligent face. He didn't just glance. He studied. He leaned in close to examine the brushwork on the sparrow's wing, then stepped back, his head tilted, taking in the entire series as a whole. This was Arthur Vance, the city's most influential and often most scathing art critic. Matthew's heart hammered against his ribs. Vance eventually turned and his eyes found Matthew, who was trying to look like a piece of the architecture. The critic walked over. "You are the artist?" he asked, his voice a low baritone. "Yes," Matthew managed to say. "You paint silence very loudly," Vance observed, his eyes twinkling. "A rare gift." Just as Vance moved on, Amy appeared at Matthew's side, her face flushed with excitement. She was holding her phone, the screen glowing. "Matthew, look." She showed him Arthur Vance's live social media feed. A photo of Sparrow after the rain was at the top, and above it a caption. In a show celebrating urban noise, Matthew's stunningly rendered works are a profound meditation on what we leave behind. A quiet, heartbreaking debut. This is an artist who finds humanity in the dust. Before Matthew could fully process the words, Amy's assistant rushed over, a small, red, circular sticker in her hand. With a quiet reverence, she placed it on the wall label next to Sparrow after the rain. "Sold. To an anonymous collector." The little red dot was a supernova in his gray world. Across the crowded room, his eyes met Amy's. He saw her beaming, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph on her face, not for the gallery but for him. And in that moment, surrounded by strangers and the quiet hum of validation, Matthew felt the sting of tears, hot and overwhelming. It was the feeling of a long, cold rain finally coming to an end. The success of the exhibition was not a flash in the pan. It was a spark that ignited a long-dormant fire. Arthur Vance's review sent a ripple through the Boston art community. Suddenly, people were talking about the artist who painted forgotten things. 2 more of his paintings sold before the show closed. For the first time in over a decade, Matthew's bank account wasn't a source of dread. With the proceeds, he paid off every last one of his debts. The first check he wrote was to his landlord, Mr. Henderson, settling his final month's rent. A week later, Henderson called, his voice uncharacteristically warm, suggesting they could work something out if Matthew wanted to stay at the Gilded Brush. Matthew politely declined. That chapter was closed. He didn't need the grand, decaying space anymore. He found a small but light-filled studio on the top floor of an old warehouse building in the Seaport district, a place with large, north-facing windows that flooded the room with the clear, consistent light artists dream of. 6 months after that rainy Thursday, Amy came to visit his new studio. The scent of fresh paint and turpentine had replaced the old smell of dust and despair. Several new canvases were in progress on the walls, vibrant with a newfound energy. He was still painting the overlooked, but now there was a sense of hope woven into the melancholy. "It looks like you've settled in," Amy said, a warm smile on her face as she took in the scene. "Thanks to you," Matthew said, his voice thick with a gratitude that would never fade. He walked over to a carefully wrapped canvas leaning against the wall. "I have something for you." He unwrapped it and presented it to her. It was a small, intimate painting titled Broken String. It depicted a close-up of a violin's bridge, where a single string had snapped, its frayed end curling into a delicate silver spiral. It was a painting about a connection severed, but also about the potential for repair, for new music to be made. "Amy," he said, meeting her eyes, "you didn't just find my paintings, you found me. You reconnected a string I thought was broken for good." She accepted the gift, her eyes shining. The gilded brush was gone, a ghost on a gentrified street. But here, in this bright new space, surrounded by his art and his future, Matthew's true brush, the one that painted from the soul, was finally, brilliantly reborn.